Welcome back to another episode of the Clearly Crucial podcast. My name is Jesse, operations consultant, and I've got a wonderful guest that I've admired for quite a few years now that we're able to talk to. This is Richard. Richard, go ahead and say hi to people, introduce yourself a little bit.
What a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be on the show. Thanks, Jesse. And yeah, man, I'm a father to three legendary little kiddos. I'm a husband to an incredible wife, and also get the pleasure of leading Unleashed, which is a company that helps match founders with the right second in command, and also secondincommand.com, a newer brand that helps train up skilled leaders and managers for the career opportunity of working alongside a founder as a second in command. And so I know this podcast focuses on how important clarity is. And on that note, if you're watching this via video, people often ask me why I have an eye chart behind me. And I always tell them it's a reminder for me as a leader on the importance of clear vision. And so there we have it. It is clearly crucial.
Perfect.
And that's how I remind myself. So I'm glad to be on the show today.
I promise we did not plan that ahead of time, but that's why I wanted to do this so intensely, is because we have a lot of similar views in terms of what's important and what's helpful. And like Richard, I'm also a very big process and people oriented guy, and that's a very big part of creating an organization that lasts, whether you've got a second in command or not, or even just one employee. There's all kinds of important things that play into the vision that you have, and it all starts with clarity. So, Richard, tell us a little bit about how you got to Unleashed, second in command, your background working in the church. Like whatever you want to bring out in terms of what brought you here in the service of those business owners, either who have a second in command or who need one.
Well, it all started when my dad met my mom, and no, I'm just kidding. We won't go that far back.
Sure.
But no, I was raised in a family of hair on fire entrepreneurs who also happened to be involved in ministry and in church world, as you said. So kind of grew up in that environment of mission-driven organizations, and just found that I had a deep passion for leadership from a young age. Was reading John Maxwell and listening to Andy Stanley, and admiring people like for whatever reason his name's escaping me right now, but the author of Good to Great, Jim Collins. Thank you.
Oh, Jim Collins, yeah.
Patrick Lencioni, all of these incredible leadership experts and authors really captured my attention. There was something in me that just knew that leading people was the skill set that I wanted to master. And so actually caught the entrepreneurial bug in high school, started my first business when I was 15, my second when I was 18, and my third when I was 21. And wow. I always joke with people that my third business almost killed me. I was in my first year of marriage and was running a really kind of fast growth. It grew kind of out of control. Real estate investing company. We were buying multifamily properties and then selling them as turnkey investments and keeping some in our own portfolio. I was not cut out for it, was totally a visionary and didn't even know what that meant at the time. And I remember literally the day I came home from work, avoided my wife, went into the spare room office that we had, curled up in a fetal position in the corner and cried out to God for help. And we were, we had multiple six figures in the red at that point. We had investors breathing down our neck. We had a partner who stole money. We got defrauded by the state government. All sorts of crazy things. There was a lawsuit pending. And I really realized in that moment that everything I'd learned theoretically in books about leadership and management, I was not applying in my own business, at least not to the level that I needed to be. And so that was a catalytic moment for me. Two things happened in that moment. One was I realized I had to confront, with all of my optimism, I had to confront the brutal facts that I had some weaknesses and deficiencies as a leader. And then I also determined that I was going to find some mentors and people who were going to help me get out of that. And thankfully, we did turn that company around with the help of some mentors, as well as with some self-awareness from me about my weaknesses and where I needed to really delegate and empower some other people who were strong where I was weak. And so out of that experience, I really believe our company Unleashed was born. Just the realization that most founders and entrepreneurs are great at, visionary stuff, starting a business and rapidly pivoting and iterating on the product and R&D and marketing and sales and PR and promotion and coming up with new ideas. And many of us are really, really bad. We don't even realize it at managing people, managing finances, managing projects. detail orientation. And so having had to confront that so early on, I think it really just marked me and it kind of birthed, I always say, the seeds of our company today. I knew that someday I had to do something to help people like me not feel
Hmm.
so alone as they were growing their company.
Yeah. Well, I think that's some of the most fun of an entrepreneurial journey, right? Is taking the rough times that you went through, whether it was in your own business or working even a job, as it was in my case, and thinking there's got to be a better way. There's got to be better ways to get this done so more people don't have to suffer or at least struggle, in the same ways. And it sounds like that kind of rock bottom moment for you really was a moment of clarity as well. Just saying, hey, okay, well,
Mm.
something's not right. I got to figure stuff out. I got to connect with people who understand this and really it sounds like that was the beginning of your awareness of the different people in different roles who all bring something to the table. Can you talk a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, well, I just want to comment on one other thing you said. A mentor of mine once said that most worthwhile missions for us as an entrepreneur are some form of going back in time and finding younger versions of ourselves with the same problems we had and helping them.
Yeah,
And I don't know who needs to hear that, but probably somebody who's maybe
probably a
searching
few.
for their next season and their next journey. Like you might actually find the answer in your past and look back at earlier versions of yourself. And hey, I'm on the Clearly Crucial podcast, so if you're trying to figure out your vision for the next season, go back into your past, look at the problems you struggled with, and maybe there are younger, less mature, or less equipped versions of yourself that you could go out and help with the knowledge you have now. So that's just a little tidbit or insight from my story. As
Love
far
it.
as really discovering the need for this second in command role in a company, it was also greatly accelerated by when I read a book called Traction by Gino Wickman.
Great
I know
one.
you're familiar with that. Also reading later on the book Rocket Fuel that he wrote, where he talks about these two great entrepreneurial leaders that are present in almost every runaway success story in entrepreneurship. And he describes those two people as what he calls visionaries and integrators. And visionaries, he says, see the future, and integrators make it happen.
Hmm.
And I've actually found that
Yeah,
to
we
be
do.
true as I've done my own study. I think you can look at, Walt Disney, who everybody celebrates, who was the visionary behind Disney. But behind the scenes is Roy Disney, who kept the company from bankruptcy multiple times and built the operational infrastructure to make Walt's crazy vision happen. You can look at, so many great examples, right? John Doerr at Intel and actually, Charlie Munger at Berkshire Hathaway. You can
Hmm.
look at Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook,
Steve
and
Wozniak at
behind
Apple.
Steve Wozniak at Apple. Yeah, you can look at basically all of these great companies, and for every founder that you look and see on the stage, in the shadows is a strong second in command who actually help make their vision happen. And I think a lot of founders they spend an inordinate amount of time and energy once they've grown their company to a certain amount of place to a certain place, doing things they don't love and aren't great at, and it actually
Right.
hinders and hurts the growth of the company. When if they were to simply become self-aware of their strengths and weaknesses as a leader and say, hey, I'm going to focus on my strengths and I'm going to hire or partner with someone who brings the strengths to the table where I'm weak, I really believe many companies would radically grow and accelerate. And honestly, it would just be more fun for everyone involved, founder most of all.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of that comes down to awareness, but part of it is the learning to let go too, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot, at least in my experience, a lot of the reasons that the quote unquote visionary, so to speak, doesn't take on an integrator or doesn't know how to find one or doesn't know they need one is because they think that getting to the next level is just doing more of like what has previously made them successful. But unfortunately, as we know, with the complexity that that scale adds, they end up doing lots of different things that they don't even care about nor much less are good at and really enjoy. And so for when it comes to really bringing, this is more of a conversation about bringing people to the table who contribute different things, but specifically when it comes to an integrator in this case, what do you think is the different level of clarity that that person brings to a visionary specifically that helps them really continue that growth?
I think this is very dependent on what stage your company is in. And there's a really good reason, I think, in my opinion, why we don't use the term integrator a lot. I have massive respect for EOS and for Gina Wickman and everything they've built. I have tons of friends in the community. But the only thing that I think is important to note is that EOS is primarily built for a certain stage and size of company, and the integrator
Right.
role fits really well in that context. If you are smaller than that or bigger than that, or developmentally, you in some cases you might actually be bigger, but developmentally be less mature, this role can
Mm,
look different. And so I really like using the term second in command because it creates a frame of understanding that most people get. There's some military background, and the term is pretty widely used. But it also, I think, leaves a lot of room for defining what level of second in command does the company need, and does the stage of the company actually, uh, demand. And so I would say on the lower end of that spectrum, you have what many people call an executive administrator, right? This is somebody who is, in my opinion, like an admin on steroids. And
hmm.
typically, this person is not someone who's going to provide you a lot of clarity as an entrepreneur. This is somebody
Right.
who gets what done and helps to manage some of the administrative and operational things that are needed for you to have time to focus on growth. And this could be a huge leap forward for a lot of companies. I always say it's not quite the same as just having an assistant. Sometimes your assistant can operate in that role, but you really do need somebody who's strategic, not just a doer, somebody who's like a buffer between you and the day to day, somebody who can liaison with key team members, has some management ability, et cetera. Right. And then I would say on the far end of the spectrum is what I would call a president or a CEO, which
Hmm.
is somebody who essentially elevates you to the board as a founder, and you don't run the company at all. You're not innovator. You're advisor at that point. And this totally frees you to go do other things. And so that can be a second in command role. You're just second in command to the owner, to the board at that point. And there's a whole spectrum in between. And I would say integrator is part of that spectrum. There's a role I love to talk to founders about called chief of staff that I think is a really great
Mm,
bridge solution. But regardless of what title you use, I think it's important to understand where you are at as a company in order to determine the level of second in command you need, and to have properly aligned expectations about what they're going to bring to the table.
yes.
The consequence of not doing that, and again, we keep using the clarity analogy, the consequences is that sometimes people will try to turn everything over prematurely to the wrong level of second in command. And I've actually seen that be disastrous, where somebody goes, I need an integrator, and the stage of company and what they can actually hire for does not fit what EOS would prescribe as that role. And so they put that person in place and try to delegate everything, and it's disastrous. So
Hmm.
it's just really important to understand where your company's at. And I would say if you're a company that, let's just talk to primarily who we work with, you're a company that let's say has somewhere between 10 to 50 employees, you can get a strong second in command who can bring a lot of clarity and experience as far as strategy, as far as helping to filter your half-baked ideas before they reach the team, and make sure that they're polished up, they're polished gems, not rough, uncut ones,
Hmm.
to avoid miscommunication and misunderstanding. You can absolutely have that expectation if your company A has lots of growth potential, and B, you're willing to offer some form of profit sharing or equity to incentivize someone of that caliber to come. So hopefully that gives a little bit of insight into how I think about what to expect from that person to bring to the table. I think it's very dependent on the stage of the company.
Yeah. Well, no, that was more than I asked for, and that was fantastic. Thank you for giving that perspective. And you're actually like jogging my brain on a really important point, which is the level of business growth depends on the need, or maybe it's the other way around. The need depends on the level of the business growth, because I've been a part of both circumstances where you've had a company who is doing very well, but was developed, like you mentioned, levels of maturity and
Mm-hmm.
size of business are two different things. And so that's something that I found out the hard way, which is, the business had grown quite large, but developmentally was a little bit immature. And even though it needed a lot of these processes and a second in command to do that, it didn't have it. And so a lot of those uncut gems, so to speak, or uncut rocks in some cases, were what drove the company up and down depending on the day. Now, on the other side, I've also
Mm,
been on the side where, someone who's a little bit more on the lower side in terms of business growth wants to bring somebody in and take over their operations and all this stuff. But then coming into that situation without them having the same growth potential, the same proof of concept, it's just a recipe for disaster. And at the end of the day, all that person really needs is a glorified like executive assistant. Really, is what they need, just a glorified assistant rather than a COO or a second in command. You know what I mean?
mm, yeah. Yeah, I think second in command, the way I always distinguish it is second in command is a container, it's a frame, it's a way to think about how to partner with somebody who's sort of the yin to your yang. The specific role within that container very much varies based on the type of company, stage of company, maturity of the company, and honestly, where you're at as a founder and what you ultimately want. Do you want to
Mm.
exit? You probably need a different type of second in command. If you plan to exit in the near future, either elevate to the board or sell, then if you're a long-term buy and hold entrepreneur, you've owned the business for, 5 to 20 years and you have no plans to sell or exit, it's just very different.
Mm. Tell me really quickly, do you have to have this conversation with business owners on a pretty regular basis about like them thinking they want something and you being like, well, let's readjust. Let's see, is this exactly what you want? Like, I'd be curious to see how that conversation goes in terms of you just you're dispelling that clarity for them in order to make the right
Mm.
decision, of course.
Yeah, the most typical thing that happens is we have business owners who come to us and they have someone, they're either interviewing them or they're on their team currently, and they're like, is this my second in command? How do I
Mm.
know? How do I be sure before I hand over keys and authority and salary? In some cases, even equity, although you don't really have to give away equity if you know what you're doing. Um, but how do I know? And that's a lot of times when people approach us, and uh, that is when I start to ask probing questions. Things like, well, what's your long term vision? What's the growth potential of the company? Um, the reason long term vision matters is that's part of what somebody's coming on board for. And so if you and them are not aligned on that, the likelihood of that partnership working is drastically lower. Like if you have a picture in your head of what winning looks like and they're not even clear on what that picture is, they might have a totally different picture. And you're going to enter some serious whitewater at some point in that
Mm.
relationship if that's not clear on the front end. Uh, I think another reason why understanding the growth potential of the company is important is I see a lot of founders hiring what they can afford right now or what they perceive they can
Uh,
afford, and not recognizing that if their vision actually happens, if they're actually on this growth trajectory and curve, they will outgrow that person unless they can rapidly, unless they just have tons of potential and are willing to tap into it like crazy, they will rapidly outgrow the person in that role within 12 to 36 months. And that's a big mistake I think people make too. Um, so those are the kind of conversations we have. I don't know if that provides enough insight, but um, that's those are typical conversations for us.
yeah, no, it does. And because getting that right is critical to avoid a lot of those issues like you mentioned, but also to provide the same kind of support that's going to stop the entrepreneur from just spinning their wheels because the problem is they don't know what to do. So doing more of that's not going to help anyway. So
Mm,
really being able to move forward through that. And so for you, I guess when it comes down to really what are the biggest factors for getting this right? Like regardless of the level
mm,
that an entrepreneur finds himself in, and obviously the level of second in command matters at that point. What are the most successful components of that achieve a sustainable amount of growth, like something that works for the long
mm.
run?
Yeah. So when we work with any founder to help them match with their second in command, the first step is always to define. And when we're defining, we're specifically defining what we call your 2IC compatibility profile. And this is a proprietary method we developed after working with hundreds of founders on this to help you and them align on three things and see if you truly match and are compatible. And they're very simple but very powerful. And the first one is what we call identity. And this goes deeper than just core values. It does involve core values, but it also goes deep into expectations of yourself, standards that you hold. You don't want two people who have very, very different levels of standards to try to work together in these roles. It just
Mm.
won't work. And you guys will frustrate the heck out of each other. So identity is the first component, and that involves core values and standards and expectations. One of the other ones that is really important in the 2IC compatibility profile is growth potential of the company. Do you see that the same way? How does that affect compensation? Many entrepreneurial companies are they're overly bullish on the growth potential, and
No, really?
one of the
Online
worst things,
companies? I've never seen that
yeah.
before.
So it's important to understand that you need to cast a compelling vision, but the vision has to be bigger than just we're going to make a ton of money in 3 years and exit, because
Right.
you can't guarantee that. And so really making sure that you're aligned on vision and growth potential for the company. Chemistry really matters too. This is one of the things that we assess. It's the soft skills, it's the unspoken things that actually make someone a great second in command from more of a internal wiring standpoint, not just an external skills. My second in command is this great model where he talks about the difference between talent and skills. And a lot of
Mm.
people hire for skills, and what they need to be hiring for is talent. And talent is innate. It's not. It doesn't sit on a resume. It's not as simple as where you've worked or what projects you've led. It's that intangible thing that if you have it, allow you to excel in certain roles, and if you don't, uh, you can putz along and do the mechanical things right, and you don't get the result.
Yeah.
And so there are very specific talents that great second in commands possess, and those need to align with and match, or better yet, complement what you bring to the table as a founder. And so that's why when we're looking at someone's compatibility profile, we're looking at both sides of the coin, understanding where the founder's strengths, weaknesses, identity, and chemistry lie, and then really looking at the second in command to see if those things mesh. And obviously, that's preliminary. We go in with assumptions on that, but the best piece of advice I can give you is to date, not recruit. And
Mm.
we do
What do
recruit. We have this whole methodology called opportunity recruiting, but recruiting is just to get a high volume of really qualified people interested in your vision and mission. And then, Jim Collins would say hire slow, fire fast. I would say date, don't recruit. So you really need to approach this more like matchmaking, more like trying to find a true partner in growth for your company, not just post a resume, get a bunch of qualified resumes, screen them for the best, run a couple interview process, and make a judgment call and hope it works out. It's a great way to lose momentum and morale if it doesn't work
Mm.
out. So I would just say to approach it more like dating and really understand the areas you're compatible and potentially incompatible before you pull the trigger on that relationship.
Yeah, because what you just described to me sounds like the textbook hiring process. Put a bunch of resumes out there, see what sticks, who has the best paper, and then go from there and hope and pray for the best. But it's rarely ever like that, right? And I'd love for you to expand just a little bit more on what you mean by take it more of like a dating approach. I get what you mean when you talk about the compatibility factor, which I think is still a big factor that most people aren't thinking about. But what does that look like practically? Like I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they talk about, I forget it, I think it's Dan Martell in Buy Back Your Time. He says um, his mentor told him, with anybody he's hiring, it's like, I can't work with you until I work with you. And so he has a whole process of,
Mm.
like working together on a preliminary basis before pulling the trigger. But I'm curious what your advice looks like for taking that more dating approach to really finding someone who's going to be a good fit for the long run.
Yeah, I'll just give you an example from my own life, and then I'll talk about something we do with clients on this front. But um, for me, I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I have more company ideas than I can probably count, and
Hmm.
not all of them deserve to be launched. But I'm actually always incubating relationships with second in command leaders. Why? Because I know that at some point, some of these visions are going to come to life and I'm going to find product market fit, or I'm going to start something and it's going to reach a point of growth where I need that person. And so I am actually always, as a founder and leader, actively dating leaders who I see their potential. I know what they're doing, even if they're not on the market or available. I'm
I
building
see.
relationships with them and collaborating with them and finding ways to test if there's compatibility and chemistry, if we have the same values, identity, and vision before I need them. And so, just a great example, we had a leadership transition in one of our companies not that long ago. And at the time, I had been dating, so to speak, my current second in command for probably 9 months. And we'd just been meeting and whatever. And so, when I made that phone call to him and said, essentially, hey, I have one of our companies that I think you would be an incredible second in command leader for. We had 9 months of history
Got
and
it.
confirmation of the relationship. And so it felt like slipping a glove on versus this
Starting
strange,
the whole process
awkward
from scratch.
process,
Yeah.
starting from scratch. And so one of the things we actually do with founders to do this is we actually created a CEO to IC matchmaking network. We don't call it that, but essentially that's what it
Sure.
is. And um,
That's pretty cool.
where essentially people will pay us just to join our network as a founder. And one of the things they get to do in that network is not just post jobs and openings they have, but they can actually post about their vision and their issues. And this gives them an opportunity to collaborate with other operations minded leaders, as well as other CEOs and network, and find natural affinity, find natural,
Mm.
when somebody is inspired by your vision and then they give you a super relevant answer to how they would solve the issue that you're facing, gives you pretty fast insight
Oh
into
yeah.
how much value that person could provide to your organization. It gives you also a great starting point to have that conversation. So that's something we've created to kind of bridge this awkward dating gap for a lot of entrepreneurs. Because
Yeah.
just candidly, the old kind of contingent recruiting model for entrepreneurial companies very rarely works in my experience. Usually you can find someone, you feel really good about them, and it lasts 6 to 12 months max.
Hmm.
And then you're kind of right back to square one. Sometimes you're farther back than when you started. And the reason for that, my opinion on that is that they're not actually focused on match and mesh, and they don't understand what makes this relationship successful. These companies, their typical clientele is large corporations where there's a very defined seat and they just need to find a qualified butt for that seat. Not the
Hmm.
case in most entrepreneurial companies. And that's why it
No.
doesn't work. It's like putting a round peg in a square hole.
Yes, that was huge. Thank you for elaborating on that too, because that, I mean, it makes sense, right? Businesses are all about relationships, not just transactional, like, hey, work for me, do this, I'll pay you this. Or at least in our world, it's not. Maybe in the high,
Mm.
corporate world that's been around for 100 years, sure, that can work with something so established, but rarely is that ever the case because so much is so new and so much is developing. So I love that kind of dating mentality to really just fostering your network and making sure that you're always in everything that's around you so that when the time comes, like you said, it's like putting on a glove. It's like a natural transition rather than an
Mm.
abrupt like shakedown for like, hey, come work for me right now. So that makes a lot of sense, and I think that will be truly valuable for a lot of our listeners too, of your networks and mine. So really appreciate you coming out and sharing all that incredible value, Richard. For anybody who wants to connect with you, wants to hear more about what you have to say, I know you do a couple of different events every once in a while, but what's the best way that someone can reach out to you or connect with you on an event where you're talking about stuff like this?
Yeah, well, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, Richard Shaull. I should know the exact back end to my LinkedIn, but I don't. But if you search for me,
You can
unleashed.ceo
reach
is our
out to me
website
as
as
well. I'm
well.
sure. I'm sure I
There
can.
you
I
go.
can connect you. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go to unleashed.ceo, that's our website for founders who are looking to build a smart team and find a second in command that can free them from the day to day so they can focus on growth. They can find lots of free resources there that we offer. And then for second in commands who are potentially listening and are like, hey, that's me. How do I get connected with a founder and accelerate my career? You can go to second in command. That's 2nd, 2ndincommand.com. and find more information there on how we help people like them get matched with founders.
Awesome. Well, that's fantastic. Thanks again so much, Richard, for coming out and sharing all that with us. For everybody else, that'll be it for today. We'll see you guys back in a couple of weeks. Until then, take care. See you next time.